Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of What's the Difference podcast. Today, our discussion is going to be about the portrayal of people with visible and invisible disabilities in film and television. We have Sam here from our regular panel today. Hi.
Hey, everybody.
And we have a special guest, Emily Schooley, who is part of the industry herself. So, Emily, first, let's hear a little bit about you and some of your thoughts on the industry as it is right now.
Sure. So lovely to meet everyone. I'm a Toronto-based queer and invisibly disabled actor and filmmaker. I have many thoughts on the industry. Some are more positive than others. I think we're at a point where we are starting to finally get more authentic rep, but I still think that it's something that has a really, really long way to go in terms of actually reaching like equity, parity, getting enough bodies and people and stories on screen that actually have lived experience outside of being cis, white, able-bodied, straight men.
Do you think that there's a significant difference between people employed in the industry versus what we see on camera in terms of invisible and visible disabilities?
We're starting to see more rep behind the scenes, but I think it's still also moving at a very, very slow rate. Something that I'm aware of is that a lot of companies are hesitant to kind of put the extra dollars in up front to hire people that are just disabled, which I think is BS. But I think now that like there's some perceptions that are starting to shift where I think people are realizing that it's necessary. There is starting to be an awareness of we need to hire and we need to be open to hiring disabled. We need to be able to accommodate our practices to include more disabled rep in front of and behind the camera.
Question for both of you. Have you observed any characters in TV or film with your specific disability? And if so, were they played by an actor who had that disability, or did they hire a fully able-bodied person to play the role? So Emily, if you want to go first.
So for myself, among my disabilities are things like chronic pain. I'm also neurodiverse, so ADHD, PTSD, anxiety. I think a lot of what we see are still able-bodied actors playing the roles, whereas I do think some of them may also have lived experiences, but they may or may not be as open about talking about it. So for example, one of my go-tos that I always love to talk about is Iron Man 3, is a beautiful, perfect study in PTSD. And I think just with all the shit that Robert Downey Jr. has lived through, he probably has a lot to bring to the role. But I also don't think that he's incredibly open these days about his mental health in interviews. So even though he might kind of identify that way, he maybe doesn't comment enough on kind of like the authentic rep of it, if that makes sense.
Definitely can think of a few examples. Daredevil, Blind Alan, Deadpool. There's also, I forget the name of the character, but there's also a character in Fantastic Four, the woman who ends up being the love interest for, oh God, what's he called? The Thing or the big rock guy.
So pretty sure that's The Thing.
Yes, I think so. I haven't seen that one in a while. But yeah, and as far as I know, they're all able-bodied people. And what I find even more interesting is that I feel like I can't relate to some of them. Like none of them kind of look like me as well. So I'm like, I don't know. It's very hard for me to kind of relate to them. And a lot of them are portrayed as being fully blind, which is so strange because that's actually like 10 to 15% of the blind and low vision community. A lot of us have some vision or some like usable sight, whereas quite often in media, we're portrayed as having no sight, like complete darkness or complete blackness and very, very little to go on, which is just such... It's not that it doesn't exist. It's just weird that that's the largest one that's, shown in media. And it's actually a very tiny portion of the population.
Or it might skew stereotypical where like everybody has the white cane all the time.
Exactly. And they do these like very stereotypical things like, I want to feel your face. And they're almost portrayed as either being very low class and low income and almost like helpless, or they're portrayed as like these heroes and these wise, like beyond, I have like vision beyond my sight, blah, blah, blah. Like it's sort of one or the other, which I think is how the able-bodied community views the blind community as either these heroes these people that, go out, do public speaking, do all of these amazing things, achieve these like amazing goals, or we're just this burden on society. There's no in between. There's like this pressure to be a superhero, or you have to do it all. You have to be this overachiever and have the career and the everything. And if you're not, you're just like seen as this vegetable that is kind of like, roaming around in your basement.
You only typically see disabilities which could interest the public. And I'm putting that in quotation. You're not going to see someone in a TV show with a congenital heart defect like I have. Why? It's boring. It's boring. You have to see, they want to show something that's visible or actually noticeable. And so why would you even write a plot about somebody with a congenital heart defect? Now, our viewers and our listeners can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have never seen anything on TV that represents who I am. So that's why I'm asking you guys the questions and not really participating myself, because I don't have much to add. I don't see that much about my condition. But how does it make both of you feel when a fully able-bodied person or a neurotypical person gets a role where they do play someone with a physical, either visible or invisible disability, or someone who's neurodiverse?
Especially in the way of neurodiversity, it's almost a little insulting in a way, I'm going to say, because there are so many very talented neurodiverse actors out there who, if you gave them half a chance, they would do equally as well in this role. But I think a lot of, and what we have historically seen, is that casting is still going to send in, like the thin, the pretty, able-bodied people, and then they often, I hate to use this term, but kind of ugly them up in one way or another to like have them play somebody with a disability. And especially for that, I honestly think that's really insulting, and it's really friggin' ableist. And like in terms of things that kind of skew more physical, I still think that they should be casting authentically whenever possible. There's one movie that comes to mind, I think it's 2014 it was from. It's called Margarita with a Straw, and it's about a woman with cerebral palsy. As far as I know, the director had tried to find an actor that did actually have the condition, but like because of the grueling shooting days, because of like needing to do certain movements over and over that would be required on set, I think she did end up casting somebody who was able-bodied but did do a lot of research. Even in that case, I do think that there are ways to adapt a shooting cycle or to like adapt your production period to be able to accommodate, once again, like we talked about, hiring a disabled actor. It is kind of that catch-22 where I understand why someone might hire an able-bodied actor even for something like that, but I also don't think that needs to be the only way forward. I think there is room to adapt essentially the filmmaking practice to include casting diversely. And right now, I think it's also something that we really, really need to push more of. Like until we're at parity, where at least 50% of people with XYZ are playing those roles. So like it's the same thing with like LGBT rep. It's the same thing with trans rep. Like a lot of these roles still go to people that have the privilege, so that are cis, are straight, are not trans. Like I said, I think it's slowly changing, but not nearly fast enough.
And for people with disabilities, especially for people with physical disabilities, it does cost more. It's more of an investment, and people don't want to spend the money. And you see that with businesses outside of the industry as well. But Sam, what about you?
Honestly, quite frustrating. I think with any disability, it's frustrating when you see someone who is completely able-bodied, who doesn't have any of that. However, I do think there is a happy balance. I think if you can't have someone playing the role who is disabled or living with whatever challenges are presented in that role, you at least want to see that there was some thought put into it. You want to know that there was research. Maybe they have like a counsel or someone advising that actor on, hey, these are my lived experiences. I'm not a performer, but can I advise you in some way so that this role is authentic as possible? So I think there's a fine balance. I think right now people are pushing for it so much because we've never had it at all. It's just always been the able-bodied person and never the person with the disability. So, and I also, what I kind of want to relate it to is the regular working world. You don't want to not get a job because of your disability, but the other end of the spectrum, you don't want to just get a job because of your disability. And I think with these roles, it's the same. You don't want to be discriminated against and told no to an opportunity because of your disability, but you also don't want to like just be given an opportunity that you're not qualified for because of your disability, because you could potentially be taking it away from someone who does have a disability, who is qualified. Like, I know there's tons of actors out there who are blind and low vision, or who are deaf, or who are living with dyslexia. And as cool as I think it is that, some places want to cast a blind or low vision or disabled actor, I sometimes hesitate because that's not I personally actually find it really enjoyable, and I like to do those kinds of projects on the side. But unfortunately, like, I wouldn't want to just take it away from somebody who is working towards being an actor or a performer, right? So there's also just filling it for the sake of filling it is also a challenge that I think we need to be careful of. But like I said, it's a balance. And I think with time, as we move forward and people start casting more people with disabilities and seeing, how easy it can be to accommodate and cheaper it can be to accommodate, it's always cheaper to add in accessibility features into anything, a program, into a process from day one, than it is to go back and do it on day 30 or day 40 or months later. Like, you know what I mean? It's just, yeah, I think it'll come with time.
Equal representation does mean hiring the best person for the job. If it means you have to look a little harder and find someone with that disability who's still the best person for the job, that's the way to go. Absolutely. So, and we want that equal representation. Emily, what are some of your favorite portrayals of disability in film and TV, and what has stood out to you?
Going back to Margarita with the Straw that I mentioned, like, it's a beautiful film. And I think like it gives a lot more of an insight into what it is to live with cerebral palsy. Like, there's also kind of like a beautiful love story woven through it. So that's one of the reasons I love it. I guess kind of jumping back to the Marvel universe, something Marvel does really, really well is kind of along like the neurodiversity and like kind of the mental illness scale. So like thinking like, say, Jessica Jones, like that's also a really, really good portrayal of kind of PTSD. And it's sort of the PTSD that a lot of people don't talk about, where, you're not the quiet victim, like you're loud, you're angry, everything that has harmed you, you're now kind of reflecting back to the world. It does kind of wander a little bit into the problematic, just in terms of, like expecting disabled people to be super somehow, like you almost have to be superhuman, supernatural, something just to exist. So, that's a little here and there. One I was actually thinking about recently, and I know they've never said it, but like going back to the X-Files, like 90s and 2000s, like there's no way Fox Mulder is neurotypical. Yeah, that level of genius, that level of focus, even though it's never said in the show, that to me says that's clearly a level of neurodiversity.
Well, did you guys watch Big Bang Theory at all?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Sheldon Cooper, definitely never anything said, but he is definitely neurodiverse. I don't know what your thoughts are on that particular character.
At least with like the way male characters are written, I think that they can skew. Oh, I'm trying to think how to word this. Essentially, it's you don't want them to be allowed to be assholes just because they're neurodiverse, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sam, what about you? Have you seen like a really good portrayal of somebody like you in film and TV, or even somebody with a different disability that you thought, oh, that person is really doing a good job of playing their role? Have you ever seen anything like that?
Definitely. I do actually also have to say some positive things about Marvel. I do think they, even though like Fantastic Four, like that character was a bit, but I'd say Daredevil is a really great one. Even though he is portraying a totally blind person, I think he, like, it's also meant to be over the top and fun because he is a superhero. It's media, right? Like, it's not real life. So I do think they bring some good aspects into it that are done really well. But I also really love In the Dark. I think that's a really great one that I've heard a lot of people talking about in the community lately. I've had the privilege of working with them, just like being in like the background and as an extra. But meeting the cast and meeting Perry, who plays the main character, to see how much effort has gone into it. And the fact that they do accommodate blind and low vision, like other characters that actually have vision loss in real life, to see the effort that was made on set, I think was really beautiful. And also that they don't focus on the blindness in the Dark. That's part of the main character's life, but it's not the main focus of the story. She has all of these other layers and things that she's dealing with. So I think that's really nice to see. As far as other disabilities, that's kind of hard because I feel like I can't say if it's accurate or not because I'm not that person with this disability. I definitely find it interesting that, as far as I know, from what I've seen of Big Bang, they never mention that Sheldon deals with anything. It's just kind of like, oh, that's Sheldon. Am I right? Do you guys know if they actually?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I have some conflicting feelings about that, because if you are going to portray somebody like that, you kind of want to say what it is, because you want people to, like, that's not just like, oh, he's weird or he's quirky, but also there's some power in that like it doesn't matter, right? Like I feel like that's another step, is that it doesn't matter what it's called or what the label is. It's just the people in his life are able to accept him for who he is. And I think that's also a really great angle. But is that because he's a male character? Because as a male character, you're allowed to have those quirks, those things that make you different and maybe a bit of an asshole sometimes. Whereas a woman, you're not allowed to have some of those traits. So is there also, like, does gender kind of come into a role there? I think is something to consider. So yeah, I have some conflicting feelings about that one.
Well, we did have in Big Bang Theory, we did have Sheldon's girlfriend and later wife, Amy Farrah Fowler, who was also definitely appeared neurodiverse at the beginning, or maybe just extremely nerdy. But the interesting thing was how their characters did grow at the end, and they became less caricatures and more people that appeared loving and all that.
I feel like what you're saying is, in real life, disability doesn't change. You know what I mean? Like it's strange that, yes, there's character development, but if it's a disability or if it's something permanent, it doesn't change. So it's kind of weird. It's like, are they neurodiverse? Are they just quirky and like that's changing? Like it's kind of hard to interpret as the audience member.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I do think with like neurodiversity specifically too, like just essentially you're gonna go through times where you maybe have, say, like fewer social skills when you're younger. Mm-hmm. And it's something that you can sort of pick up as you go. And it doesn't mean that it's not still an issue, but maybe you've either, and I know this is especially the case for women, like masking with ADHD, neurodiversity, like women especially, that's why like a lot of girls go undiagnosed with ADHD, because like they learn how to kind of be more social and like fit in to some degree. I say this with air quotes, but just kind of by like mimicking or reflecting the behavior of their peers. Mm-hmm. So, like they're like less likely to be flagged, whereas boys, if they are running around kind of like what we think of as like the ADHD stereotype, where, they're hyperactive, they can't sit still, can't pay attention. In real life, they're more likely to get diagnosis and treatment. And I think like a lot of our perception of certain disabilities is because of what we see on screen. Another movie I'm going to mention really quick because I love it. There's a 2016 horror movie called Hush, and it's about a deaf woman surviving an attack like at a remote cabin in the woods. And like they do a lot of what I would say would be like appropriate representation, like in terms of things like her fire alarm has a big flashing light, like the way that her texts come in, the way that she interacts with technology. There was clearly a level of care and research. Plus, she's just really, really, really badass. And like, if you love horror at all, I highly, highly recommend it. It's that like that real person survival kind of feel of horror. So like there is some gore, there's lots of tension. it's just beautifully done. And I can't fully remember if they had a deaf actress or not, so I can't comment on that, but at least the on-screen rep it seemed fairly accurate, I would say.
Totally forgot about that movie, but I love that movie and I love the end. I don't want to like spoil it for anyone who might be watching this later, but like I feel like it's empowering. So there's definitely some, you know, contradicting feelings about the disability superhero or like survival, like rah, 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 is like, it's super empowering to see someone with a disability succeed and win. But then also it's like, you know, there's a pressure to live up to that for people. But yeah, I love that movie. It's a great one.
So Sam, you touched on I don't know if it was a film or a TV show where you mentioned that the character's disability wasn't the focal point of the show. My question to both of you is, do you think that it normalizes a disability when it isn't the focal point of the show and the character just happens to have a disability, but it's not part of the storyline?
I think it does a really good job of just, like, I would have killed to just see a character that had a disability like mine. And honestly, whether it was the main focal point of the show or not, I'd just be happy to have a role model like that. But yeah, I think seeing that she had all these other layers, you can clearly tell the difference when that's the focus or not, which is funny because a lot of my abled friends watch the show, or a lot of like feedback or criticism that I think the show gets is like, oh, you know, not all blind people struggle with alcohol and party or do this and this. And it's like, but that's the point. She's not all blind people. She's an individual with this variety of experiences. And that's just one part of it. We're making her not a typical like Hollywood character that we've seen over and over and over again. So I think it really does normalize it. I think it does a lot. And yeah, I think it does a lot.
My one sort of, I guess, like flag or concern, I would say, is that you also want to make sure that it is accurate to somebody's experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes with either having like authentic lived rep in the writer's room with all that research, but like say for example, like somebody with chronic fatigue or something, or like an undiagnosed physical health condition, like, well, it shouldn't necessarily be like the focus of the story, you know, especially as women or as like AFAB folk, like seeing what people need to go through sometimes to get support they need, I think could also be very eye-opening. So I think in terms of that, like, I think it's very important that to have authentic rep on screen, that you don't gloss over those trials and tribulations that people do go through that able-bodied people might not be aware of. But at the same time, it can become kind of like, I guess, like myopic or insular, where you don't just want to make it about that. And I think just having it be part of somebody's life, like, I think it really does help to normalize it, as long as we portray it in a way that does not minimize their experience, if that makes sense. Also gloss over the bad to still make it like PR worthy, or like, like another one that kind of comes to mind, like the show The Good Doctor. I believe that's the one where he's on the autism spectrum.
Yes, I forget that actor's name, but he's really good. He's done quite a few roles that I think he just does phenomenally in.
Finally, how can the film and TV industry continue to improve when it comes to representing people like us?
I'm going to say just put goddamn money into disabled art projects and hire more disabled people. Like, that's something I've kind of noticed too, just in my own journey. And I'm just going to say it because I've noticed it. Things like the arts councils are still incredibly ableist in terms of even like your application process. And even though, you know, they give some money for disability support, kind of waving my hands in air quotes again here, like they still tend to give money to the people that have had more privilege. So people that have been able-bodied, people that have, you know, been able to successfully do film school, that maybe already had access to professional opportunities, professional types of media, you know, tools, equipment, support, that people that would be disabled would probably have a hard time accessing. So like there's still a system of inequality and imbalance that I think really needs to be disabled. Pardon the pun, like in terms of like this system. Thanks, brain.
Sounds like a social media campaign.
That's actually a great idea.
Yeah, I feel like that we should make that a thing.
Disable the ableism.
Yes, I 100% think we should. Can we make that hashtag when we
Yes,
post this
absolutely.
video?
When we post this video, you're going to see, everybody's going to see this right now across our screen. Disable the ableism is going to come. That's what it was, right?
I love it.
Yes,
I'm going to use that on like everything I post now.
Awesome. You guys came up with this. You're smarter than I am. Yeah, Sam, what do you think? Where do you think improvements could be made in the industry?
That's every industry. Like there's so many things that have to change. Even the application process for regular jobs, for any job really. I think something I've started saying just in my job, because I come across, I work for a charity that serves the blind and low vision community. And a lot of the times places will come to us and say, hey, we've, made our product accessible. Will you look it over and get people like, the community's opinion on it? And to me, that's the first problem, because you're coming to me and the community after you've made a product, not before. It needs to be from inception. It needs to be from the very beginning. And a lot of the time people just want a pat on the back at that point, because they're like, oh, I'm confident that I've made this accessible. I want to show people and spread the word and hear about what a great job I've done. But really, if you wanted to make it accessible, you would have thought of that much earlier. Or I don't even want to relate it to a matter of want, but if you had given it more thought, you would have come to us much sooner. And I think what I've started to sort of say to people when they ask, like, what can we do? I don't want you to want to make the change. I just want you to make the change. I'm tired of people saying, like, I want to make this inclusive, or I want to, make this accessible, or blah, blah, blah. I'm at the point where I'm beyond what your wants are. I want you to make it happen. I spend my entire childhood listening to, like, oh, let's get the ball rolling. Let's get this started. Let's move forward, blah, blah, blah. And as a person with a disability, I'm over it. I want to see action. I want to see you make the change. That's what I think. The want is great. Yes, the want is lovely. Of course, I'm not saying, like, I don't want anyone to desire to make change. I'm not saying that. I just think it's time to get past the desire and actually do something about it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was going to say move forward, and I was like, no, that's another BS term that I don't want to hear.
It's the planning to do something versus the actually physically just doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or instead of, like, expecting the people with a disability to always tell you what they need and ask specifically for it, like, start to anticipate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you both so much for this very insightful discussion today. This was excellent. And thank you for helping me out, because I'm not very knowledgeable about film and TV. So I'm glad to have two experts here on the panel. One last thing, Emily, where can we find some of your work?
Yeah. So I'm patreon.com/Emily Schooley. People can pledge there any dollar amount. They can see what I'm up to. I post behind the scenes photos. I talk about some of the series and projects that I have in development. I will give you guys a little spoiler. Right now I'm developing a Magical Girl series with one explicitly physically disabled character as a lead character, one non-binary character as a lead character, and bringing, like, a lot of, like, queer lady rep to screen in various forms. So it's very early development. Essentially, the series is about a group of former magical girls who are now in their 30s and 40s, and they have to come back together with their new lived experiences, their identities, work through some of their interpersonal shit, and save the world again. So.
All right. Well, we will be sure to check that out. In the meantime, don't forget to click to subscribe to our channel and check out all our past videos and episodes on our channel. We've got plenty of stuff, and we've got plenty more coming out. So thank you, Emily. Thank you, Sam, for joining us today. And this has been another episode of What's the Difference podcast. Take care, everyone.